She woke before the sun, folded towels with steady hand, poured tea, watered basil. No medals on the wall, no spotlight, just a quiet woman with a sharper memory than most men twice her size. She'd served, she'd stitched, she'd saved lives in war zones and kitchens alike, and when trouble came close, she didn't yell. She wrote dates, times, badge numbers. They called her paranoid, said she was seeing things, but the footage said otherwise, and so did the blood. They killed her on her porch, told the world it was a mistake. What they didn't know? Her son had been trained to disappear into countries without leaving footprints, and he'd just stepped off the plane. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. She was always up early. Always. By 6:30, Eloise Carter had already folded the first load of towels and placed them on the faded wooden bench on her front porch. It was the kind of morning ritual that never needed to be spoken about, just part of her rhythm. A woman of quiet habits, 74 years old, with strong hands that had once stopped bleeding in battlefield tents and later calmed crying children in Sunday school. She'd seen war and peace, sometimes in the same week. Her neighborhood was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes from long years of people learning to mind their own business. Retired mechanics, widows with curling garden gloves, grandkids who visited every third weekend, a row of modest homes with vinyl siding and aluminum screen doors that squeaked when the wind hit just right. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dangerous, it just was. Eloise stood at the edge of her porch, holding a kitchen towel against her hip. She took a deep breath, smelling the faint trace of lavender she always used in the rinse cycle. The air was warm, sticky already, like the day was bracing for something to break. That's when the cruiser came. It didn't come with sirens or lights. It didn't announce itself with the usual hum of authority. It just rolled slowly down the street like it was sizing the place up. Inside sat two officers. One of them young, twitchy, with short-cropped blonde hair and eyes that didn't know how to rest. The other, older, heavier, with a jaw that looked like it had clenched its way through decades of disappointment. Their faces were unreadable, but their presence said everything. Eloise noticed them. She always noticed things: movement, posture, hesitation. She was trained to see the signs long before people spoke. She gave a small, polite nod, a gesture of neighborly acknowledgement, nothing more. They didn't nod back. The cruiser stopped in front of her house. No one got out. For a few seconds, it just idled there, engine humming low. Eloise shifted her weight to her left leg. She didn't fidget. She didn't flinch. She waited. Eventually, the driver's side door opened. The older one stepped out first, his belt creaking under the weight of gear. The younger followed close behind, eyes darting. Eloise put the towel down on the bench and walked down the 2 steps of her porch. "Can I help you?" she asked. Neither of them answered. The older one was already eyeing her grocery bag sitting beside the door. The younger one stepped toward her, hand resting near his holster, not drawn, but not at ease either. "We had a report," the younger one finally said. "About a suspicious person. Seen around here." Eloise blinked slowly. "Suspicious how?" "Don't know. Just doing a check. Mind if we look through your things?" She paused. "Yes, I do mind. Unless you have a warrant." The older officer made a noise, half scoff, half grunt. He walked right past her, reached for the grocery bag. "That belongs to me," she said. Calm, not loud, not aggressive. "We're not going to take anything," the younger one muttered. "Just looking." Eloise stood in front of her screen door, arms crossed gently in front of her chest. "I've lived in this house for 31 years. My name is Eloise Carter. I'm a retired Army medic. If you have a concern, I suggest you call your supervisor." The 2 men exchanged a glance. The older one rifled through the bag anyway: some canned peaches, a bottle of aspirin, a folded receipt. Nothing else. "No dirt?" he asked. Eloise nodded toward her front door. "Inside, on the table." "I wasn't planning on being interrogated while folding laundry." There was no apology, no de-escalation, just a cold silence. And then, as if bored, they both turned back toward the cruiser. As they walked away, The older one mumbled something Eloise didn't quite catch. Maybe she was never meant to. The doors slammed, the engine revved, and the car pulled off, leaving behind only the faint echo of suspicion. Eloise stood still for a moment. She didn't move to pick up the bag. She didn't go back inside. She just stood there, eyes on the street, watching the dust settle where their tires had been. Then she reached down, picked up the receipt, folded it neatly, and slid it into her pocket. Inside her house, she opened a drawer beside the phone, pulled out a notepad, wrote down the time, the date, and a description of both officers. She didn't shake. Her handwriting was as steady as ever. She dialed the non-emergency line for the police department, waded through the automated system, pressed the number for "File a complaint." When the beep came, she spoke clearly. "My name is Eloise Carter. I'm calling to report an incident that occurred at my residence this morning. 2 officers approached me without probable cause and searched through my belongings without permission or a warrant. I asked for their supervisor. None was provided. I have their description. I'd like this recorded and followed up." She didn't ask for anyone to be fired. She didn't raise her voice, just the facts. Because she still believed that truth, if said plainly enough, might be heard. When she hung up, the screen flashed a case number. She wrote it down: 841 DRQ 1187. Then she folded the paper, slid it into her address book, and went back to folding towels. Outside, the sun had risen fully now. The heat was beginning to press down. The birds had stopped singing, and Eloise Carter, without knowing it, had just filed the last complaint she would ever make. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. No callback. No officer showed up. The case number that had once flashed clearly on Eloise Carter's screen now led to nothing. The next morning, she tried again. The automated system responded flatly, "Record not found." That was when she understood this wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. She didn't tell anyone. Not her neighbor who brought her tomatoes from the garden. Not the postman who always stopped to ask about her roses. Not even the pastor who checked on her after service. It wasn't fear that kept her quiet. It was experience. Because Eloise knew, when the system wants to make you disappear, it doesn't shout. It stays silent. So she did what she always did. She moved through her days like life was still normal. But the signs came quietly. One evening, just before midnight, a cruiser parked across the street. No sirens, no lights, just idling. The windows were tinted dark. She stood behind her curtain, eyes trained on the shape inside, motionless. No knock, no words, just presence, watching. Another night, she found her garden hose running. The valve had been turned on all night. Water soaked into the dirt path beside the house. Her shoes squished as she stepped out to shut it off. There was no sign of trespass. But the message was clear. This wasn't policing. It was pressure. Each time, she logged it in a small spiral notebook, the same one she'd once used for grocery lists and medication refills. The handwriting was neat, like her military files used to be. The 17th of July, 11:42 p.m. Cruiser passed. No lights. Plate unreadable. The 19th of July. Hose turned on. Front gate still locked. No one seen. She didn't speculate. She didn't assign blame. She just documented. Then came the 4th night. It was after midnight again. She was reading in bed when she saw ITE headlights off. The same cruiser. Parked across the street, engine silent. Eloise stood quietly, just behind the window pane. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't call anyone. Because in her heart, she knew this wasn't about a suspect. This was about her. She waited. 15 minutes passed. Finally, a porch light flickered on at the neighbor's house. The cruiser eased into gear and rolled away like mist. Eloise didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m., she opened a drawer and pulled out the old audio recorder she hadn't touched in years. It was the same one she'd used to document her husband's final months, back when doctors told her he was exaggerating his pain. Back when proving his suffering required tape. She pressed record. Her voice was soft. "They keep coming. I don't know why. I haven't done anything. But they park outside, stare at the house. They don't say a word. They don't ask anything. They just, look, I don't feel safe, and I don't think I'm supposed to. The next morning, she called the complaint line again. She waited on hold for 11 minutes. The same music loop played 3 times. No one answered. She put the phone on speaker and let it play while she made tea. Steam curled around the base of her mug. The line disconnected itself at minute 15. By noon, she printed out her own summary of the incident, the complaint, the officers, the disappearing case file. She mailed it by certified post to the Internal Oversight Division, the address she found on the city's website. She didn't include a return envelope, just the facts. Nothing more. The receipt went into her address book, right next to the defunct case number. She was not new to resistance. She'd stood under fire, carried wounded soldiers across mine-laced fields. She'd seen pain so raw it stripped a person of speech. She'd watched a man die holding her hand because she was the only one who didn't turn away. She knew what it meant to endure. But this silence, this official void from people sworn to serve, it felt colder than any battlefield. Because in war, at least the enemy wore different colors. That Sunday, she got dressed early. Powder blue dress, gold clip in her hair, lipstick just a shade too bold for someone her age. She walked to church with her chin up, smiled at the children, sang louder than she had in months, but her hands trembled during prayer. And when someone asked if she was all right, she simply said, "Just didn't sleep well." No one pressed, because in neighborhoods like hers, people knew. Some silences weren't meant to be filled. They were warnings. The sermon that day was about forgiveness, about letting go of anger before it shapes you. Eloise listened carefully, but her mind wandered to the notebook, still sitting on her kitchen table, to the garden hose, to the quiet car that had returned again and again. After service, she walked home slow. The kind of slow that isn't weakness, but thoughtfulness. Her son tried to call that night. The connection was poor. Static swallowed half his words. He was still deployed overseas some security detail that he couldn't talk about. The call dropped after 90 seconds. She left him a voicemail. "Hey, baby, I just wanted to hear your voice. Everything's all right here. Just been thinking about you a lot. Call me if you get a chance tomorrow. I just need to hear you're okay." She didn't tell him about the officers, or the vanished case number, or the car that watched without blinking, because she knew him, and she knew that if he sensed anything wrong, anything at all, he wouldn't hesitate, and she wasn't ready for what that meant. Not yet. The next morning, Eloise Carter woke up early again. She always did. Habit wasn't something she changed, even when the world around her started to shift in quiet, disquieting ways. She folded her blanket, checked the mailbox, watered the last of her potted herbs on the porch, but something inside her felt unsettled, not fear, just the slow burn of knowing that something was moving behind her, beneath her, without her permission. Later that evening, she tried calling the Oversight Division, the one she'd sent her complaint to by certified mail. She wasn't asking for much, just confirmation, just proof that her words had landed somewhere. But the number listed on the city website now rang twice, and then cut to a message, "Temporarily unavailable, no alternative number, no forwarding line." That same night, the porch lights outside her house flickered. Not for long. Just once. A blink. Like someone cut the circuit and stitched it back together in the space between breaths. She turned off every light inside. Saturday in the dark with the blinds cracked open. And she didn't wait long. The cruiser came back. Same car, same windows tinted like a lie that never changes. This time, it parked directly across the street. No engine running, no headlights, no movement. It didn't bother hiding anymore. She didn't blink, just sat at the window and stared, as if she were holding vigil over the truth no one wanted to name. She reached for the recorder again. Her voice came out steady. Midnight, July 23rd. They're back. Same car. No lights. Just sitting there. Still no contact. She waited another 20 minutes. Still, no one stepped out. But then, just as she started to turn away, her phone lit up. Unknown number. No message, no text, just a quiet ring. Then silence. They weren't just watching anymore, they were signaling. That was when she knew for certain. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't about mistaken identity. This was deliberate, a pattern, a practice. And she was part of something larger, something systemic. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about testing how long someone like her would hold the line. She looked down at her hands, wrinkled but still precise. These were hands that had sewn up soldiers in jungle rain, hands that had closed eyes of the dying. Not because she was brave, but because no one else was willing to. She didn't fear them, but she'd stopped expecting fairness. The next morning, she walked to the corner market. Mr. Alvarez was behind the counter, like always. The place smelled of cinnamon and floor polish. He'd run that shop since her son was in high school. He looked up and paused. "They stopped you again, didn't they?" he asked, voice low. Eloise didn't answer right away. "Why do you say that?" He sighed. "Because I saw them, last week, outside. They were going through your bag like you were hiding dynamite. But you didn't flinch. You looked at them like they were the ones who should be nervous." She raised an eyebrow. "So?" He leaned in. "So I know what that means. People like you, they don't like you. You don't lower your head. That scares them more than anything." She said nothing. He pulled out a small paper bag from beneath the counter. "Here. On the house. And if they come sniffing again, tell me. I got a new camera installed." She took the bag and nodded. Her fingers brushed his for just a second. That was enough. In this neighborhood, alliances weren't spoken. They were felt. But the pressure didn't let up. 3 mornings in a row, her mailbox was left open. Even after she'd checked it, her garbage bins were tipped over. On the sidewalk in front of her porch, someone painted a red X. She called the city utilities. They said it was a marker for plumbing, but no other house had one. On July 24th, she called the Civilian Protection Liaison Office, left a detailed message. "My name is Eloise Carter. I'm calling to report repeated, targeted harassment. I've already submitted documentation through the proper channels. I have a receipt confirming delivery. I am requesting immediate follow-up. Thank you." She didn't receive a call back. That afternoon she checked the complaint portal online. Her name was gone. The case number? No match found. But the final blow came the following morning. A plain envelope was left in her mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, no return address. Inside was one sentence, typed in small black font. "Some people don't know when to stop asking questions." No signature, no logo, no explanation. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even record it. She just stood in the kitchen, holding the paper like it was a final notice that truth would no longer be tolerated here. She looked over at the old recorder still sitting on the table. She tapped it once, then twice, then turned it off. Not because she was giving up, but because she knew whatever came next couldn't be spoken aloud. It had to be done. Quietly. Precisely. Like all the most important things she'd ever done. Toby Grant hadn't slept in 3 nights. It wasn't the time zone. It wasn't the mission. It was the silence from back home. He'd called his mother 4 times in 5 days. Once it went to voicemail. Once it rang 5 times and cut off. Twice, it didn't connect at all, not even static. He knew something was wrong the second she said, "I just need to hear your voice." That wasn't her way. Not unless something beneath her calm was breaking apart. He was stationed in Northern Europe. Officially, he was training local units. In reality, he was running strategic assessments for a NATO defense program of those things nobody on the record ever talks about. But the moment that last call dropped, he filed for immediate leave. No questions, no explanations, just a code that didn't ask for details. His commanding officer glanced at the paperwork and asked, "Trouble at home?" Toby didn't say a word. He packed light, black duffel, tactical boots, old field jacket with the patch removed. His mother always said that jacket made him look like the wind couldn't move him. By 2 a.m., he was on a flight. Not commercial, not tracked. The The kind of quiet transport the government uses when they don't want paperwork. He slept with one eye open. By sunrise, he touched down in Washington, and the moment his boots hit American ground, he felt it. That old tension in the back of the neck. That shift in the air, like something sacred had been disturbed hours ago, and no one had bothered to tell him. He didn't call anyone. Didn't check in. He retrieved a civilian alias ID from a secure locker in Arlington, still active, still clean, and dropped completely off the radar. Then he drove, straight south. Not on highways, not past toll booths. He switched cars in North Carolina, took backroads most GPS systems wouldn't bother mapping. It wasn't paranoia, it was how he'd been trained. Because Toby wasn't just coming home, he was re-entering contested ground. When he finally reached the block where he'd grown up, he parked 2 streets away, got out, walked the rest of the way with his collar turned up and a backpack over one shoulder. Nothing looked different. Same crooked stop sign, same basketball hoop leaning sideways on Mr. Jenkins's garage, same mailbox rusted halfway through at number 312. But something was wrong, not visibly, in the air. It felt like something holy had been cracked, and the pieces swept away before anyone could ask what it meant. He approached the porch like a man entering a crime scene. Calm, focused, not afraid. He saw the signs. A faint chalk mark on the sidewalk, too clean to be kids. A cable on the utility pole that didn't match the others. Grass flattened in 2 perfect tire tracks along the fence. He knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. He turned the knob. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like lavender and lemonwood polish. A smell he remembered from childhood. The smell of safety. But this wasn't safety. This was aftermath. He didn't call out. He moved like he would through an unsecured building, silent, scanning every corner, watching for changes in shadow and air. Kitchen. Clean. Table. Untouched. A notebook lay open, his mother's handwriting, precise and calm. Cruiser passed. No lights. Mailbox left open. Case number deleted. Unmarked envelope delivered. No signature. Living room. Neat. No furniture disturbed. Bedroom. Bed made. Clothes hung. No sign of packing. She hadn't left. She hadn't planned to. On the table beside the couch was her old recorder. The one she used for recipes, shopping lists, old gospel hymns. He pressed play. The final recording played. They're watching again. Just sitting there. I don't know what they want. I haven't done anything. But it feels like they're waiting for me to make a mistake. A pause. Then a whisper. Toby, if you hear this, I just need you to come home. I think they want me quiet. That was it. The file ended. Toby didn't move. He didn't speak. He stood at the center of the house where he'd once built Lego towers and learned how to tie his boots. Then he reached into his duffel and pulled out a small flash drive. Military-grade encryption. Loaded with an off-grid surveillance system he'd helped develop, capable of scraping location data, mapping response patterns, and tracing movements through anonymized pings most systems didn't even log. He powered on her old laptop. Slow, humming, but still alive. He plugged in the drive, and the screen filled with light. Police vehicle logs. Times. Locations. Frequencies. His mother's address flagged 7 times in 4 weeks. Pings clustered like red bruises, each entry stamped with a different officer ID, but all routed through the same district node. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't paranoid. She'd been under surveillance. And no one, not the city, not the department, had admitted a word. Toby closed the laptop, pressed both palms flat against the table. He took a breath. Deep, heavy, then whispered, "I'm here now, Mama. Let's begin." It happened faster than anyone could react. It was a humid afternoon, quiet, the kind of heat that made everything still. Lawnmowers had gone silent, wind chimes barely moved. Even the air seemed to be holding something in. Eloise Carter stepped onto her porch with a small trash bag in her hand. She wore her ash-gray house shirt, soft slippers, and a scarf pinned neatly around her hair. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't running. She was just taking out the trash like she had done 1,000 times before. 2 blocks away, Toby was sitting at a red light, engine low, hand resting lightly on the wheel. He hadn't slept, but his mind was sharper than it had been in months. Something inside him buzzed. A noise only instinct hears. His mother's voice still echoed in his head. "I think they want me quiet." That's when the car appeared. A silver sedan tore around the corner. No siren, no lights. Too fast for any neighborhood. The tires screeched as it skidded, fishtailed, then slammed to a stop 3 houses down from where Eloise stood. 3 officers jumped out. The first, young, lean, fast already, had his weapon drawn before his foot hit the ground. "Stop, police!" he shouted, breath wild. The second officer was older, slower, his radio raised but his mouth too slow to speak. The third, fresh-faced, barely old enough to shave, froze as soon as his boots hit the pavement. A young man in a hoodie darted from the passenger side of the sedan. He took off in a full sprint, but he didn't run toward Eloise's house. He veered left, leapt over a hedge, and disappeared behind a line of old sheds and fences 2 houses down. But Officer Dunth, the young didn't see that. He didn't process direction. He didn't verify. All he saw was motion. All he saw was a black woman on a porch, holding something in her hand, stepping into the sunlight. And in his twisted, panicked logic, that was all he needed. "Hands up!" he shouted, raising his weapon. Eloise froze. Not out of fear, but confusion. "I live here," she said calmly. "Get on the ground!" he shouted again. His finger was already pressing the trigger guard. "I'm just taking out the..." The shot cracked the air like a thunderbolt. A single report, loud, sharp, final. The bag dropped first, hitting the wooden steps with a dull thump. Cans spilled out, clattering and rolling in lazy circles. Then her knees gave out. Then her body folded, gently, as if even gravity refused to rush the fall. She hit the concrete with her cheek. Blood began to bloom, dark and spreading across the front of her gray shirt. No scream, no last word, just silence. The neighborhood held its breath. Curtains snapped shut. Children ducked behind fences. Somewhere, a sprinkler kept turning, oblivious. Then the roar of tires broke the silence. Toby's black SUV came around the corner like judgment itself. He swerved, jumped the curb, and flung open the door before the wheels had even stopped turning. He didn't run. He walked, fast, measured, every step a practiced move, a man who'd trained his whole life not to panic when panic would have made sense. He reached the porch and dropped to his knees. His mother lay still, one hand open, as if reaching for something she never got to say. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. No pulse. He leaned close, ear to chest. No breath. He closed his eyes for 1 second, just one. Then, with incredible gentleness, he slid his hand over her eyes. They closed like they were always meant to rest that way. He stood. No tears, no words, just presence. Then he turned to face the officers. Dunn stood frozen, gun half lowered, lips parted in a look of slow realization. The older officer had finally caught up and gasped when he saw the body. "What the hell did you just do?" he shouted. Dunn said nothing. The trainee officer backed up, hands shaking. He looked like a kid who'd just watched someone die in a movie, except this wasn't fiction. Toby pulled a phone from his jacket. Not a normal phone. Medi-Black. No markings. He tapped in a code. It connected without a ringtone. A woman's voice answered. "Confirm protocol," she said. "Civilian casualty," Toby replied. "Type AD erect relation. Eloise Carter." A pause. "Coordinates?" He gave the address. "Confirmed. Response en route. Local jurisdiction is now suspended." Toby ended the call, then raised his voice. Loud, clear, unshakable. "You shot my mother because she was black, didn't you?" No one answered, but the way Dunn's face drained white was the only confession needed. Toby stepped forward. 1 step, just enough. "Was she reaching for a weapon? Did you check your perimeter? Did you confirm the suspect? Or did you just see skin and squeeze?" Dunn swallowed. His voice cracked. "Two thought. You didn't think?" Toby said. "You pulled the trigger and waited for reality to catch up." The street was silent again. Except this time, silence wasn't just grief. It was the sound of a system beginning to break open. Toby looked down at the blood on his mother's porch, then back at the officer, and said, You have no idea who you just made an enemy of." No one moved. The sun pressed down hard, but the air stayed cold. Officer Dunn still had his gun in his hand, but his grip had gone slack. His mouth hung open, eyes bouncing between Toby and the woman lying in a growing pool of blood on the porch. The senior officer took a step back, muttering something under his breath. The trainee looked like he was about to vomit. Neighbors began to open their doors slowly, just a crack. No one spoke. No one filmed. They just watched, eyes wide, faces stunned. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they've just witnessed something they can never unsee. Toby stood completely still, his hands relaxed by his sides. His chest rose and fell slowly, controlled, trained. But inside, something had already shifted. Not rage, not panic. Something colder, more focused. He looked down at his mother one last time, then back at Dunn. "She was a medic in 2 wars, he said flatly. "Saved more lives than you'll ever touch. And you shot her while she was holding a bag of empty cans." Dunn didn't answer, couldn't. That was when the black SUV turned the corner. Not Toby's, another one. Unmarked. No decals. No city tags. It stopped quietly at the curb. 2 men and 1 woman stepped out. Dark suits. No visible weapons. One held a sealed silver case. The other held a biometric scanner. The third simply scanned the crowd with cold eyes, noting every badge, every holstered gun, every trembling breath. "Federal Response Team," one of them said, showing a black card. "This scene is under federal lock. All local officers are to step back immediately." The older cop tried to protest. "We haven't even—" The woman raised her voice, cutting him off without raising it. "Step back." And they did. Dunn was disarmed without struggle. His weapon tagged, logged, and sealed inside a sterile case. The trainee was escorted away quietly. The older officer stood frozen, unsure if he should follow orders or run. Toby didn't speak to the feds. He didn't need to. One of them handed him a black earpiece. He took it, put it in. "Listen, your call was authenticated," the voice said. "Containment protocol is active. Incident classified as type a civilian fatality with active federal clearance tie-in." Toby said nothing. "We'll secure the body, extract data, suppress civilian footage. We'll notify Central. Do you wish to remain primary contact?" He hesitated, then said, "Yes." He watched as they approached Eloise's body. Not with violence, not with detachment, with reverence. They placed a cover over her slowly, not like evidence but like she was someone who still mattered. Because she did. Toby walked to the edge of the porch, looked out across the street. People were still watching, still waiting. He raised his voice in anger, but like a man reciting orders to a unit. "She didn't do anything wrong. Don't let anyone say she did. She was murdered. And this time, someone's going to answer for it." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But one by one, more doors opened. More faces appeared. And for the first time in a long time, Toby didn't feel alone. Inside the house, he went straight to her desk, opened the drawer she always kept locked. The key was still hanging on a small nail behind the photo of his father. Inside, her journal, a flash drive, and a folder labeled, "If Something Happens." He sat down and opened the folder. Inside were screenshots, call logs, copies of the complaints she filed, names, dates, everything the system said didn't exist. She'd kept it all. Toby leaned back in the chair. Now it was war, not the kind fought with bullets, the kind fought with records, truth, and resolve. He pulled out his laptop, began uploading every file to a secured cloud. Backups, duplicates, triggers. Then he made a call. Not to the news, not to the police, but to someone in Washington who owed him a favor. When the line picked up, he said just 5 words. "It happened. I need everything." The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. They just said, "Understood," and hung up. Outside, the street was beginning to clear. But nothing was normal anymore. The blood had been cleaned. The porch hosed down. But the stain wasn't gone. Not from the street. Not from history. Not from Toby. The next morning, the world knew her name. Not because of a press release. Not because of a news cycle hungry for another tragedy. but because someone from the neighborhood, a teenager with a cracked phone screen and a steady hand, had filmed the entire thing. Start to finish. No filters, no edits, just truth. The video went viral before breakfast. It spread through group chats and church forums and veterans' pages faster than any algorithm could suppress it. No hashtags, no slogans, just a single caption. Her name was Eloise Carter. And then came the silence from officials. No apology, no press briefing, no public statement. Because this wasn't just about a mistake. It was about exposure. They hadn't just killed a woman. They had killed a veteran. A healer, a symbol. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, someone recognized her name within minutes. A clerk pulled an old file, then called a supervisor, who called someone else. Until finally, a dusty folder made its way onto a polished table in a classified briefing room. Service record, immaculate. Combat history, 2 deployments, Panama, Bosnia. Commendations, multiple. Medical interventions in hostile zones. Field surgeries done under fire. Civilian lives saved. Eloise Carter wasn't just a retired Army medic. She was a quiet legend. The kind of person the military never talks about until it's convenient. Toby didn't wait for anyone to spin the narrative. He got ahead of it. He sent the documents from her folder to 5 separate contacts: lawyers, activists, former intel agents who owed him favors. Each got a copy of her service record, her complaint history, and the footage. He didn't tell them what to do. He didn't have to. By noon, an independent news blog ran the headline, "Decorated Army Veteran Killed by Police While Holding a Trash Bag." The article didn't editorialize. It didn't need to. It showed the footage. It printed her service history. It ended with a quote pulled from her journal. "They keep coming, and I don't know why. But I won't leave my home. I've earned my peace." The story exploded. It reached families in Georgia and Arizona. It aired on small-town morning shows. It hit front pages of newspapers that still cared about truth. But for Toby, none of that mattered. He was back at the house, sitting in her old chair, staring at the wall like it might speak. Because what haunted him wasn't the violence. It was the slow erosion that led to it. The ignored complaints, the quiet harassment, the moments people looked away. She didn't die in a vacuum. She died in a system built to pretend she never existed in the first place. And now, he was going to make sure that system had to say her name. He opened her journal again, started from the beginning. The first few pages were about her garden, notes on soil types, reminders to prune basil before it flowered. Then came the medical notice tips she'd copied down from old field manuals. But by page 23, the tone changed. "Officer circled block twice today. I waved. He didn't wave back. Complaint filed. No confirmation received." Logged time and date. Then page after page of observations, receipts, notes, names. She had done the work. She had documented everything. And no one had listened. Until now. Toby scanned each page, converting it into a searchable archive. He highlighted patterns, identified gaps. Every officer she'd mentioned, he logged into a timeline. Every lost complaint, he cross-referenced with dates when cruiser logs passed her address. The patterns were there, and they were undeniable. She hadn't imagined a thing. They had tried to erase her voice. And now, her son was turning that voice into a record no one could delete. That evening, as the sun set over the street she had protected simply by living on it, Toby received a call. It was from one of the lawyers he'd sent the file to. "We have a case," she said. "Wrongful death. Civil rights violation. Negligence at multiple levels. And more." Toby didn't react. He just asked, "Will it stick?" The line paused. "Depends on how loud you're willing to be." He looked at the photo of his mother on the shelf. Her smile was soft, but her eyes? Her eyes had always been sharper than any knife. "I'm not here to make noise," he said. "I'm here to make sure it never happens again." 3 days after the shooting, the mayor finally stepped in front of a camera. Her face was pale under studio lights, voice brittle like she was trying to read sorrow from a teleprompter. She offered condolences, called it a tragedy, promised an independent investigation, used all the right words, But somehow, every sentence landed like dust. No one bought it, because while she spoke, the footage had already surpassed 6 million views. Not on news channels, on phones, in living room, in church parking lots and VFW halls, and across small-town kitchen tables where people said quietly, "She didn't deserve that." The public didn't need an investigation. They had eyes. They saw Eloise raise no weapon. They saw her holding a trash bag. They heard her say, "I live here." And then they heard the gun. By then, Toby had already filed the federal lawsuit. The paperwork was layered like armor, filed in multiple jurisdictions, anchored by civil rights attorneys, veterans advocacy lawyers, and one retired prosecutor who had lost his own sister to a bad traffic stop decades ago. The suit named the officer, the department, the city, and the Internal Review Board. It alleged civil rights violations. It alleged wrongful death. It alleged deliberate negligence, systemic failure, and obstruction of due process through the documented suppression of Eloise's previous complaints. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't do interviews. He let the filings speak. But the movement didn't wait for permission. People started marching, not just in major cities with camera crews, but in quiet towns, places that never made the national news. They held candles outside courthouses. They carried signs that didn't scream, but whispered truths: veteran, mother, killed. And beneath those signs, printed in faded black and white, was the face of Eloise Carter. "She was one of ours," someone said at a vigil. "I served with her," said another man, holding back tears. "She saved my life. Panama, 1990. She taught my daughters CPR in the church basement," whispered a woman who had never spoken at a microphone before. Toby didn't attend every gathering, but he watched from afar, not through headlines, through the emails, the voicemails, the digital flood of people who didn't want to be part of a trend. They wanted to be part of a reckoning. At the house, he was building something far more powerful than protest signs. He was assembling a war file. It wasn't just evidence. It was testimony. It was pain, systematized. He digitized every one of Eloise's handwritten logs, every complaint she filed, every badge number she mentioned. He gathered footage from neighbors, transcripts from dispatchers, timestamps from cruiser GPS logs. He used mapping software once built for drone warfare to trace the pattern of intimidation against her home. And once all the threads were in place, the pattern was undeniable. Every complaint had triggered more surveillance. Every call she made was followed by silence and then escalation. Every time she asked for help, the system responded by marking her, not as a citizen to protect, but as a problem to manage. So he turned the file into a weapon. He sent it to oversight committees. He sent it to civil liberties watchdogs. He sent it to lawyers, journalists, retired JAG officers, and 3 veterans organizations, 2 of which had once refused to take on police accountability cases. Each recipient received the same note, printed in bold: "If you delete this, you are complicit." Some ignored it. Most didn't. Within 72 hours, the Department of Justice issued a preliminary inquiry. Within 96 hours, 2 officers involved in the Eloise Carter incident were placed on administrative leave. The city released a statement calling the shooting unfortunate, but not reflective of departmental values. But their words didn't matter anymore, because the public had already judged them. Toby had something stronger than outrage. He had momentum. He took meetings in quiet rooms that required clearance and passwords and signatures just to enter. He met with legislative aides, senators, and retired generals who remembered his mother's name from classified reports. He didn't ask for justice. He asked a question: what would you do if it was your mother? Some looked away. Some made phone calls. One senator said, "We'll introduce a resolution, a recognition of her service, a call for oversight." Toby gave a small nod. But inside, he wasn't impressed. Resolutions were made of wind. He didn't want wind. He wanted law. He wanted accountability that cost something. He wanted the system that ignored his mother's cries to feel her absence in every form, every office, every press briefing that tried to move on. So he kept building. He filed over 24 FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act, filings for body cam footage, cruiser logs, internal memos, and chain of command communication from the weeks leading to her death. He was stonewalled, so he adapted. He contacted former colleagues from intelligence operations. They helped him recover metadata that city servers had accidentally deleted. A retired judge passed him a leaked internal audit from the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board. It was short, 3 pages, but it said everything. Her file had been flagged 3 times. First, priority monitoring. Then, non-compliant. Finally, escalation advised. No explanation, no incident notes, no accountability assigned. Just those 3 markers. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he uploaded the document to the archive, made it public. He didn't add a headline. He didn't write an op-ed. He didn't speak. He just let it sit. Eloise Carter had been targeted, not by a single man, not by one bad cop, but by a culture built to suppress the people who ask too many questions. And now, that culture was under siege. The pressure started to crack the walls. It began at City Hall. A staffer leaked an internal email chain. Top officials had known about Eloise Carter's complaints months before her death. Not only known, but actively worked to bury them. One email read, "She's persistent. Someone needs to step in before this turns into something bigger." The leak made front-page headlines. By the end of the day, the city attorney quietly resigned. No press release, just a folded flag on his desk and an inbox wiped clean. Then it moved to the department. The chief of police stood at a podium in front of a wall of American flags. He spoke for 94 seconds. No questions, no remorse. He called the shooting an avoidable tragedy, but refused to say whether the officer would be charged. The crowd outside the station didn't chant, didn't heckle. They didn't need to. They simply held up her photo, creased, copied, passed from hand to hand. A face now seared into every wall that had once ignored her. The police union fired back immediately. They claimed the department was being politically targeted. They said Officer Dunn had followed protocol, said he had feared for his life, said the training manual justified the shot. But this time, no one listened, because this time, the footage wasn't locked behind a courtroom or edited by a network. It was everywhere. Playing on TVs in diners, streaming on silent loops in gas stations, shared by veterans who once wore the same patch she did. There was no escaping her face. There was no escaping what had been done. And for the first time in a long time, the people in charge were cornered. They tried to meet with Toby. He declined. They sent intermediaries, liaisons, spokespeople. He refused them all, because by now, he didn't need their permission. He had leverage. Every hour, new pieces of his mother's timeline were published online. Every document, complaint, cruiser log, body cam, freeze frame was indexed and released. Toby didn't accuse anyone. He didn't editorialize. He simply showed the truth and let it burn. The people did the rest. They called their council members. They emailed senators. They showed up in front of buildings that had never known protest and simply stood in silence, dozens of them at a time. Some in wheelchairs, some holding candles, some just holding her name. One protester held a sign that said, "What if she was your mother?" It went viral. Meanwhile, the DOJ elevated its inquiry to a full-scale federal investigation. The FBI requested full access to Toby's data system. Even the Pentagon issued a rare statement confirming Eloise Carter's service record and announcing a posthumous recognition ceremony in her honor. Toby didn't attend. He sent a letter instead. It read, "If your medals couldn't protect her while she was alive, don't pretend they mean anything now." The letter broke the internet. People printed it out, taped it to their front doors, read it aloud at town halls. Veterans recited it at grave sites. Police unions called it inflammatory. But silence from Washington said everything. Inside Eloise's home, Toby worked around the clock. The living room was a war room, laptop cords tangled over maps. Sticky notes marked patterns across 3 counties. A digital whiteboard tracked which officials had received the archive and which had remained silent. He was no longer a grieving son. He was a tactical operator executing a moral campaign. and the country was watching. One night, a journalist called Himone he respected, the kind that wrote slow stories, deep stories. "I've been following your archive," she said. "Off the record, I've never seen the system shake like this. But I need to ask, what do you want?" Toby didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I want the truth to cost them." He didn't mean money. He meant reputation, legacy, illusion. He wanted the systems that allowed this to bleed publicly, so no one could look away again. That journalist ran a story that night. It wasn't about how Eloise died. It was about how she lived. She wrote about Bosnia, about Eloise carrying a wounded teenager through sniper fire, about nights in field tents where Eloise performed surgery by flashlight, about the Sunday school class she led for 7 years, about how she planted basil every spring because she said the smell made the house feel alive. The article ended with one line: "She didn't ask to be a martyr, she asked to be heard." That's when everything changed. A week later, a federal judge fast-tracked the wrongful death lawsuit. The city council held an emergency vote to disband the oversight board that had ignored Eloise's complaints. But Toby knew bureaucracy could bend without ever breaking. So he escalated again. He contacted the Constitutional Accountability Center and drafted a legislative bill. It was called the Eloise Act. Its purpose: to mandate external, independent investigation for any officer involved death where the victim had filed prior complaints. No exceptions, no internal reviews, no delays. The bill started quietly. Then it ignited. 3 senators co-sponsored it. Veterans groups endorsed it. Gold Star families posted videos of support. And Eloise Carter's name, once whispered on a porch, was now printed in draft law. The boy who once watched his mother stitch bullet wounds in silence had turned her final breath into something permanent. Not a monument, a mandate. And he was just getting started. The hearing room was quiet. Rows of people filled every seat, some in military uniforms, some in plain clothes, some clutching faded photographs of people they'd lost to silence. The name on everyone's lips wasn't just a case anymore. It was an echo. Eloise Carter. The committee chair adjusted her microphone. "This session will now consider public testimony for the proposed Eloise Act." Toby stood when his name was called. He wore his old service jacket, the one his mother stitched back together after it tore in the field. The unit patch was still missing, but the scars in the fabric had a story. So did he. He walked to the podium slowly, not to stall, but to make sure they felt each footstep. "I didn't come here to give a speech," he began. "I came here to carry forward what my mother never should have had to bear alone." The room leaned forward. She served this country with a sewing kit in one hand and a stretcher in the other. She saved lives in combat. She saved dignity in her neighborhood. But when she needed help, she got silence. He held up a single document, the internal flag that said, "Escalation advised." This is the last note placed on her name before she was shot dead on her own porch. For what? For living, for speaking up, for keeping records. His voice didn't shake, but the silence behind it did. "I know some of you think this bill is too broad, that it will tie the hands of law enforcement. But let me be clear. My mother wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking not to be erased." He paused. "You want to know what justice looks like? It's not just about trials. It's not just about charges. It's about making sure that the next woman filing her 6th complaint, calling the non-emergency line for the 7th time, knows someone is listening." There were no interruptions, no crosstalk, just breathless stillness. He ended with 6 words: "Please, let her name mean something." When he left the hearing room, people rose not because of who he was, but because of who she had been. A week later, the Eloise Act passed committee review. 2 weeks after that, it passed the Senate. And for the first time in a decade, a justice bill crossed the House floor without a single vote against it. The president signed it in a small ceremony. No cameras, just Toby and a folded flag on the table beside him. Behind them, framed on the wall, was a photo of Eloise in uniform, young, strong, eyes focused on something past the frame. Like she always knew this moment would come. But for Toby, the work didn't end there. He returned to her home, To the porch, the blood had long since been washed away, but in its place was a bronze plaque. Eloise Carter, veteran, mother, witness, never erased. He touched the railing she once leaned on and looked out across the street. Neighbors passed by and nodded. Some brought flowers, others just paused, and over the next few months, the country changed. Across the nation, hundreds of flagged complaints were reopened. Laws were rewritten in 3 other states, modeled after the Eloise Act. 2 officers involved in Eloise's surveillance were fired. A third took early retirement. The Civilian Oversight Board gained national accreditation, and transparency policies were updated in more than 40 departments. Most importantly, the people who had stayed silent during her final year, the ones who once said, "It's not our place," began to speak. At churches, at schools, in city council meetings, they spoke her name like a vow. Officer Dunn was indicted on multiple charges: manslaughter, falsifying evidence, and obstruction of justice. The trial drew national coverage. Families traveled from out of state just to sit in the gallery. But Toby didn't attend. He spent that week at a veterans hospital, helping set up a new community program in his mother's name, Carter House, a safe space for elderly veterans dealing with systemic neglect. He didn't need to watch the man who pulled the trigger. He was too busy building something that would outlast it. Later that winter, he visited her grave. The stone was simple: her name, her rank, a single line beneath. "You didn't flinch. Neither will we." Snow dusted the top of the headstone, soft and clean. He stood for a long time, not in mourning, in steadiness, because he'd done what he came to do, not just hold someone accountable, but force a country to remember. Not with a speech, not with a statue, but with change. Real change. And when he left the cemetery, he didn't walk alone. 3 young girls from the local school walked beside him. One carried a journal like the one Eloise used to write in. Another wore a patch on her sleeve, an embroidered cross over a medic bag. The third just looked up at him and said, "My mom says your mom helped save a man during the war. Is that true?" He smiled. "It's true. Did anyone thank her?" "They're thanking her now," and they kept walking. A few steps behind them, an older woman in a gray sweater quietly placed a single white rose at the base of the headstone. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because Eloise Carter wasn't just a name anymore. She was a movement. She was a law. She was a mother who never stopped protecting. And now, she never would. 6 months had passed. The world had moved on, as it always does. Headlines shifted to new crises, new names. But in one small neighborhood, where a bronze plaque caught the morning sun on a front porch, Eloise Carter's presence remained. Toby never expected the world to pause forever. But what he did expect, what he fought for, was that it would never forget. He stayed in the house, not because he couldn't leave, because it wasn't finished. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, just like she used to. He'd fold a towel across the porch rail, not because it needed folding, but because that's how she began her day: neat, useful, deliberate. A rhythm built from care. People came, strangers sometimes, veterans, young women with notepads, grieving mothers, local reporters. One by one, they knocked on the same door where silence once answered, and now they were met with something different: witness. Some just asked questions, some just cried, some said nothing, just stood on the porch with their hands in their pockets, staring at the step where her blood had once dried before the rains washed it away. He never turned anyone away, because this, too, was part of the work. The Eloise Act had changed things. It was being enforced, reviewed, refined. Oversight bodies now included people like her nurses, teachers, veterans, not just lawyers and administrators. A few cities even invited Toby to help train new officers not on combat, but on presence, on humanity. He didn't teach them how to fight. He taught them how to notice, how to listen when a complaint isn't just a file, but a lifeline. One cadet, barely 22, asked him quietly during a break, "Do you think people like me can change anything?" Toby looked at him, said, You can ruin everything in 3 seconds, or you can save someone's world by just showing up. Either way, it's your choice." The cadet nodded. A week later, that same young man helped stop an unlawful arrest during a wellness check. He quoted the Eloise Act during his report. He cited the clause. He kept someone safe. Small, maybe. But Toby knew that's where real change lived. Not in headlines, in habits. By late spring, something unexpected happened. He got a letter. It was handwritten. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. Inside was a note from Officer Dunn's mother. It didn't apologize for her son. It didn't ask for pity. It just said, "I watched your mother's testimony. I watched your silence. I watched you build something my son never understood. I'm sorry for what you lost, and I'm sorry for what he never learned." Toby folded the letter carefully, placed it inside Eloise's journal, and left it there, because some grief isn't meant to be answered, only held. Later that month, the local high school renamed their community service scholarship. It became the Eloise Carter Resilience Grant. The first recipient? A student whose mother had once come to Eloise for help with eviction paperwork. She wrote an essay about what it meant to be seen, to be respected, to be remembered. Toby read her words under the auditorium lights and felt, for the first time, not anger or purpose, but peace. Not everything was healed. The city still had problems. The department still had shadows. But now there were lights on in the corners, eyes that stayed open, and people who whispered her name like it was instruction, not memory. Eloise. A few weeks later, Toby stood again in front of her grave. This time, he brought no speech, no flowers, just himself, and a simple item, her old wristwatch. He placed it at the base of the stone. He'd had it cleaned, polished, but he didn't restart it, because some things don't need to be reset. Some moments hold enough weight to stretch across generations. He stood there in the breeze for a long time, and for once, he didn't feel like something was missing. He felt full. He felt forward. And when he turned to leave, he wasn't alone. A child walked beside him, a boy about 10, dragging a too big backpack behind him. "Were you her son?" the boy asked. Toby nodded. "She was brave," the boy said. Toby smiled. "She still is." The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out a laminated flyer Eloise's photo. Beneath it the words, "She didn't stay silent. Neither will we. My teacher gave this to us," the boy said. "She said when we see something wrong, we write it down. We speak." Toby nodded. "Your teacher's right. She said your mom taught people that." "She did." And together, they walked back toward the street, toward a world still learning but no longer pretending it didn't know better. Summer returned quietly, the way old friends do softly, with more warmth than words. The crepe myrtle in front of the Carter house bloomed early that year. Its pink petals spilled gently over the porch railing where Eloise Carter once stood every morning with a towel in hand and quiet strength in her bones. And though she was gone, her rhythm remained. There was still a chair where she used to sit, still a folded towel across the bench, still a soft scent of lavender from the potted plants she'd raised like children. But there was no longer any fear, no longer a lingering shadow of silence. Instead, there was legacy, stillness with meaning. 6 months had passed since the Eloise Act became law, and what began as one woman's quiet resistance had become a national touchstone for moral clarity. Across the country, community centers hung her portrait near the entrancino because someone told them to, but because someone had to. In dozens of cities, civilian boards were restructured, their seats now filled with nurses, educators, veterans people who had lived lives like hers and had been ignored just the same. Toby stayed in the house, not because he was anchored by grief, but because it felt like the right place to begin again. Each morning, he walked the same path his mother once did, down the porch steps, past the mailbox that no longer got tampered with, through the block she once patrolled in her own quiet way. The neighbors waved differently now, not out of politeness, but out of knowing. They didn't look past him anymore. They looked through him and saw her. At the elementary school 2 streets over, the students had planted a listening garden in her honor. Each flower bed was named after one of her journal entries. Speak plain, show up, Write it down. The children didn't fully understand everything Eloise had lived through, but they understood enough. She was kind, one boy said during a classroom presentation, and she didn't quit. That was the truth, reduced to its most sacred form. The Carter Foundation continued to grow. What started as a single scholarship had become a national program offering mentorship, training, and legal aid to women filing formal complaints in high-risk systems from housing to hospitals to law enforcement. The organization's slogan was stitched on every brochure and every shirt. 3 simple words, never erased again. And Toby, once reluctant to be anyone's symbol, had become something unexpected. Not a leader, not a hero, but a steward. He traveled less now, choosing instead to walk with depth, not distance. He ran weekly writing workshops in the basement of the community center, helping people document their stories just as his mother had done with hers. "I'm not a writer," an older man had said once. "You don't need to be," Toby replied. "You just need to be honest." The man came back the next week with a 12-page letter he'd never mailed to the housing authority. It was raw, beautiful, and he read it aloud, trembling. That night, everyone clapped not because it was perfect, but because it was heard. That was the world Eloise had tried to build, one breath at a time, and now it was breathing. In October, on what was now known as National Civic Resilience Day, thousands of schools took part in a collective moment of reflection. Students wrote letters to people in their communities who had shown up when it mattered. Some wrote to bus drivers, some to older siblings. More than a few wrote to Eloise Carter. "I don't know you," one 9-year-old girl wrote, "but I love who you were." That letter made its way to the porch. Toby found it one morning tucked under the flower pot. He opened it, read it twice, and then slipped it between the pages of his mother's last journal, because those words, like hers, were worth saving. Later that month, Toby sat on the edge of her grave. The headstone was shaded by a tree planted by 3 volunteers from a local college. The grass around it had grown back thick. There were no more cameras, no more microphones, just a man and memory. He placed a pebble on the headstone, a quiet Jewish tradition someone had taught him on one of his trips. He liked the gesture. It didn't fade like flowers. It stayed. He whispered her name, not as prayer, but as promise. Then he stood. He looked across the small cemetery hill and saw 2 children crouched beside another grave, writing something in chalk on a flat stone. They looked over and waved. Toby waved back. The world wasn't healed, but it was healing. As he walked back toward the street, a warm breeze carried a familiar scent, lavender, maybe, or something like it. Something that reminded him of home, of old songs, of folded towels and quiet defiance. At the corner, a mural stretched across the side of a building. It wasn't flashy. Just a painting of Eloise seated on her porch, pen in hand, eyes forward. Beneath it, in bold white paint, she saw, she wrote, we listened. Toby paused. He didn't take a photo. He just stood there, letting it wash over him. A small crowd gathered behind him. Strangers, mostly. Some carried notebooks. Some just stood in silence. One by one, they placed small objects beneath the murala candle. A pressed flower, a worn dog tag. No speeches were given. No music played. It was enough to be there, to witness, to continue. When the sun dipped low and the mural glowed gold in the light, Toby turned away, his heart full but steady. His mother was gone, but her voice had multiplied, and it would never be erased again. What happened to Eloise Carter wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning, a mirror, a lesson. It showed us how dangerous silence can be, and how powerful one voice becomes when it refuses to disappear. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a celebrity. She was a mother, a veteran, a woman who kept records and kept her dignity, even when the system turned its back. And in doing so, she gave us all a blueprint for resilience. This story reminds us that no matter how small our actions may seem, writing things down, speaking up, showing up, they matter, they ripple, they protect. Especially for those of us who have lived long enough to see cycles repeat, It's never too late to say, enough. Never too late to ask hard questions. Never too late to stand beside the truth. Eloise Carter didn't live to see the change. But because of her, others will. Because of her, laws were rewritten. Young people were educated. Silence was broken. So if her story moved you even just a little, please don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone you love. Someone who needs to remember that dignity doesn't come from a title, it comes from how we live. Click like to help more people see this story. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing voices that refuse to be erased. And leave a comment, tell us who in your life reminds you of Eloise. Because stories like this only live on when we choose to carry them forward. Thank you for watching, and never stop showing up.